We're going to open the hearing on House Bill 404. Representative.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, with your indulgence, can I pass these out?
You bet.
And also, with your indulgence, I'd like to pass out a handout. Would that be okay?
That'll be way fine.
Okay, we're ready? All right, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Lee Deming. I represent the good people of House District 54, Laurel. Yeah. We'll try it again. I'm Lee Deming, D-E-M-I-N-G, House District 54, Laurel, Montana. The purpose of this bill is to require that the U.S. Constitution be followed, particularly with regard to sending our National Guard into combat overseas. So I've handed out the Constitution in case anybody wants to take a look at that as we're going along. I'll refer to that later in my presentation. So to oppose this bill is to declare that you don't follow the Constitution or the rule of law, that you couldn't care less about the physical and mental devastation America's wars of choice have wrought in this state. You've heard maybe that National Guardsmen have said that they want to fight terror. What do they think is happening in America right now with the war against fentanyl? And which more directly affects our people in this state at this time? What's going on over there or what's going on over here? National Guard, the nation is in the title. It's not some other nation. It's our nation. You know that those in favor of the bill cannot tell you their stories, because doing so will end their careers. Even at that great risk, some members of the Guard have written an anonymous testimony supporting this legislation. To risk their careers to let you know how this thing is going. If you represent people in Indian country, just like everyone else, remember that those constituents need protection. You shouldn't want our National Guard sent overseas when there is so much to do here. Let's help our Native brothers and sisters with the devastation visited upon their tribal lands by drug and human traffickers. And why can't we use our National Guard for that? We can't, because sometimes they're somewhere else, like Syria or the Horn of Africa. There is a fiscal note. I would like you to take a look at that fiscal note and my rebuttal to that fiscal note. If you'll read the top of my rebuttal, you will see that the assumptions that all fiscal notes are built on are completely faulty. It assumes that somehow, the fiscal note assumes that somehow the National Guard will lose funding and equipment. So there's, I think, 4 pages, 5 pages of rebuttal there. I urge you to read that, because it completely debunks what you're going to hear from the opposition. There is no way that you're going to lose funding or equipment if this bill passes. All you're going to do is to protect the lives of our National Guard who are being sent overseas into combat without a declaration of war. The federal structure, federal law, and common sense prevent the loss of funding and equipment. Okay, but let's say the fiscal note is right. Let's just say that. How much does the treatment of the mental and physical health problems suffered by our veterans cost the state? The devastation created by deploying our forces into foreign conflicts with no goal and no end brings immense costs borne first by our National Guard, then our other constituents. And then we must try in the legislature, as you well know, to mitigate those costs. How much did we spend on mental health in Montana in the last session? You remember? $300 million. And remember, that devastation is generational. It doesn't go from just this generation. It goes from generation to generation. And I have some proponents out here who'll talk about the cost borne by their families for these deployments overseas. What the fiscal note assumes is that the Department of Defense can actually withhold resources in punishment for state policy decisions. The opponents of this bill know better. Just ask them. It is the legislative branch, not the executive branch, that controls federal spending. They know that. Take a look at the Impoundment Control Act of 1974. This prohibits the executive branch from withholding funds appropriated by Congress unless Congress specifically authorizes it. Does anybody in this room think that our newly elected senator and Senator Daines is going to let any of that money leave this state? Oh, and I would ask you to reflect for a moment on where those federal dollars come from. So they're going to take money from us that they have already taken from us? To take that position is to admit a stunning lack of analysis. There was a legal note. How does this bill trigger a legal note? Well, when all this bill is asking is that the federal government follow the Constitution. Well, look in your constitutions. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11 grants Congress, not the president, the power to declare war. You knew that from your high school civics classes. And if you didn't, you're the victim of educational malpractice. Once war is declared, Article 2, Section 2, Clause 1 says that the president shall be the commander-in-chief and can call out the militia to do three things. Look at it, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15. It says, call out the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. Does it say anywhere in there that the militia can be sent to Syria? Now, the opponents know this. I'm going to tell you again. They know all this. They somehow want to say, well, we're not going to follow the Constitution anymore. Somebody in this room told me that in the last session. Literally shrugged their shoulders and said, we just don't do that declare war thing anymore. I'm still shocked by that 2 years later. So here's a question for you. What other parts of the Constitution are we going to say, we're just not going to do it that way anymore? And who is threatening to take away the resources that our National Guard depends on? Who is it? I want to know. I want their names, ranks, and titles. And I'll tell you what, I'll get those names to the executive branch. I'll get those names to the senators. I'll get those names to the Secretary of Defense. So if there's anybody out there that's threatening this, tell us. Don't give us this vague threat. You know, it's against a Department of Defense Directive 1344.10 for anyone in the military to lobby Congress. I think another witness is going to come in here and they'll give you that directive. You can read it yourself. President Trump has declared that he will close the southern border. Where do you think the human and drug smugglers will go next? And what's going to stop them? Does Montana really want to deal with the chaos created by that shift while our National Guard is protecting someone in another country? I don't have helicopters to give you rides to convince you to vote for this bill. I wonder what those helicopters rides cost. You know, as long as we're looking at costs in the fiscal note. I do not have the resources to compete with those forces arrayed against us. All I have is a Constitution. And the testimony of those whose lives and the lives of their families were devastated by America's undeclared wars of choice. Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee.
Thank you, Representative. We just need to talk for just a minute here. This is a very large bill hearing, and Chair Perry runs a very different committee. It's the only committee like this in the whole legislature because in just a few moments we will have opponents first. Every other committee in the House and the Senate does proponents first, but this committee does opponents. And there is a large number of opponents and a large number of proponents. And so I feel it's necessary to put a 2-minute time limit on in-room opponent and proponent messages and a 1-minute time limit for online messages. And I think the way that I am going to do it as the chair is when the 2-minute times come up, I don't know how to do this nicely, but I am just going to say time is up. And I would just urge you, because there is so much testimony to be heard, please don't repeat what previous speakers have said, just to move the meeting along, because I just asked Mr. Burns here, we've got roughly 25 people here in person and 12 online. So this is a very large bill hearing. And I guess on that note, did I leave anything out? Representative Carter.
Chair Kometz, I would just appeal to the chair and say possibly consider giving 5 minutes to the first proponent and the 5 minutes to the first opponent so they can get out a lot of their testimony. So the folks that come up behind them can just do a me too, if that's possible. And they're going to have, I presume they're going to have the most of the testimony for both of those, and then I think the rest of it would probably go a little bit faster, and then we wouldn't have to keep calling people up for questions for things that they leave outstanding as well, Mr. Chair.
Representative Carter, you made a very strong case.
Sure.
Yeah.
Who gets to determine who's the first proponent and opponent who gets more time than the other?
I'm going to determine that by whoever stands in the podium the first. I don't know how to sort it out. Okay.
No, and that's a great point, and I think the proponents and opponents should figure out between themselves who they want to go up first. So if they have a primary representative, then they'll usher that person up first and let them take most of the time. Yeah, you don't want I agree. You don't want somebody who just wants to say me too be the first person and blow that 5 minutes. Mr. Chair.
Representative Carter, excuse me.
Mr. Chair, may I recommend that we go equal time, as you said earlier, and then we get those proponents or opponents back up for questions for further time. And that's how they get to speak more.
Representative, I think we'll do the 5-minute rule. I think it just might make things move a little quicker. Do we need Representative Carter?
Sorry to chime in again. I think the bill sponsor had something to say about that. I'd sure like to hear what the bill sponsor had to say about that too, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm comfortable with your original plan with the 2 minutes and then 1 minute online. Okay. If the chair decides differently, I'll accept that as well, but I would prefer the 2 and 2. But if we do go to the 5, I would like to select the witness that would come in for the first 5.
Okay. Well, Representative Deming, why don't we go for the 5, and you can select the opponent if you need a little chant to visit among yourselves before we start calling opponents. If not, I would entertain the first opponent come to the podium, and we will start the timer. It is okay. It is okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do we want to give them 30 seconds or a minute to talk amongst themselves?
I do. Yes, they can.
All right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We know who's going first. We can always call people up for more questions and focus our questions on people that have the best questions. That's why keeping it even is a good idea. But you've already made a decision. We'll go with that.
Okay. Okay.
Mr. Chair, I think I'm the first. Was it 2 minutes or 5 minutes? Just to make sure I got it clear.
We're going to go 5.
Okay, 5. Thank you, sir. I do have a handout I'd like to put out, if I could, with your permission, Mr. Chair.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you would state and spell your last name.
Yeah, I'll let you, because it'll be quick, and I want to make sure you have it in front of you before I go. So then I'll state my name. You bet. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and the members of the House Energy, Technology, and Federal Relations Committee. I'm Major General J. Peter Ronick, spelled H-R-O-N-E-K. I'm the Adjutant General for the Montana and the Commander of the Montana National Guard. I am also in the Governor's Cabinet as the Director of the Department of Military Affairs. I'm here to strongly oppose House Bill 404 because it will have catastrophic impacts on our members and our national security. First of all, I want to be just to state that I'm also very surprised that this type of legislation is brought. If there is a conflict with the Constitution, I really believe they should be held at the national level with the Supreme Court. Are we doing it right or are we doing it wrong? That is really why have a constitution at a state level to decide whether you're doing it right or wrong. So I'm a proponent of our Constitution, the members that support our Constitution, and the soldiers and airmen of your Montana Guard support the Constitution and to that level with their lives. I'd also like to make a couple things that because of your support as a legislator, you have phenomenal support of your National Guard. What we do at the federal and the state level is second to none. How we are capitalized and the resources that we have to do our federal mission that we're called to do by the president through the executive orders or for the authorities through the authorities given by Congress and not disputed so far by the Supreme Court, and what we do at the state level. We have the capacity of 3,400 soldiers and airmen that can do both, and they do it very well. This last 4 years of my tenure, they've done over 1,200 soldiers have deployed overseas, and over 500 have done state missions when called to. And we're there right now, and right now I have over 3,000 airmen to support our state duties if called to duty, and we're ready to go, and we're proud of that one. Our Montana Soldier Airmen have raised their hands to serve and protect our nation. This bill would create a protected class of service member, and that to me is discerning. We have served at equal levels in the Joint Force, Army, and active duty, Guard, and Reserve, okay? Protecting us from harm's way, and that to me would be almost insulting to a service member going like, why is that person's life worth more than mine? Why is the thousands of Montanan service members, active and reserve, okay for them to be in these operations and us not to be? We train together, we're resourced together, we do the mission. This is a very hard thing to make a protected class. Our Constitution doesn't make protected classes. We all sign up as volunteers to do that. The Montana National Guard is ready and capable. With Section 3 of the bill, it prohibits us to do any Title 10 missions, foreign or domestic, in Title 10 status, unless it's a declaration of war. There's many things that have been going on for the last 85 years that your guardsmen have done honorably to do that. No, they are not allowed to do that. Because of that, because we're highly, and you see in your handouts that we're at a high risk of losing federal funding. That was my job before I came here. I did resourcing for the National Guard and for the Air Force to look where forces are to meet the capabilities of it. That was my job. Please ask me questions about how I did that and how that worked, because it was there, and no one threw me in jail. So you can use my name on those authorities, and that's what I did. It was part of my job, and that's why the governor hired me here. I am here as a cabinet member, and to know that I am here on the state status, and I have all the authorities to talk and lobby and do that, and also show and promote the missions of the National Guard. So if there are accusations made, please, I'd like to clarify that, and I have legal assistance. I make sure everything I do is with the legal and fiscal authorities. But with that said, because we're not accessible, that puts your resources in great risk. I will just kind of wrap up real quick, but this legislation needs to be done at the national level.
Time's up.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, committee members, my name is Mike Talia, T-A-L-I-A. I am a Helena lawyer. I'm speaking on behalf of the American Legion Department of Montana and the Montana National Guard Officer and Enlisted Associations, and on my own behalf. Yes, I was a military lawyer for many years. I've even practiced law in Syria. I want to just make a few points for you. House Bill 2 provides for no military pay and allowances, provides for the provision of no military equipment, and no operation and maintenance money for the Montana National Guard. Those resources come from the United States of America. At this particular juncture in history, since Youngstown Sheet and Tube during World War II, executive power is at its maximum. And what this bill would do is put the soldiers and airmen of the National Guard in a really difficult position when they have potentially President Trump and Governor Gianforte telling them to do different things. And that's not fair to individual soldiers and airmen of the Montana National Guard. I do believe that the sponsor and the proponent's testimony or their reading of the Constitution is incorrect. I don't think it's right, and I don't think it has historical precedent. And if anybody has not read the April 18th, 2014 Congressional Research Service report on declarations of war and authorizations for use of military force, historical backgrounds, and legal implications, I encourage you to do so. You'll see that active duty combat operations, as this bill uses, which is an otherwise undefined term in the mobilization authorities of Title 10, as that term is used, that has been done for centuries without congressional activity. And Congress did authorize, through its authorizations of use of military force, the activities and what we here referred to as the forever wars. Mr. Chair, with your permission, I would like to be excused. I have to get to another hearing if I can, and I'll try to get back by the time questions are coming.
You're excused.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next opponent.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Lonnie Johnson, L-O-N-N-I-E, Johnson, common spelling. I am the state commander for the VFW Department of Montana. I'm a former Montana Guard member. I was a member of the Montana Guard. I oppose this bill. I was a member of the Montana Guard before Total Force, Joint Force concept, when we had nothing. We didn't have any funding. We didn't have any equipment. It wasn't fun to be in the Montana Guard at that time. I went active duty, served my country that way, came back, did some more time in the Guard, got out. I can see the fiscal rebuttal. The way around that from the federal government would be to basically do another realignment, take away all that equipment, make new mission for the Montana Guard when it comes into the total force concept. And that's what I have for you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee.
Mr. Chair, committee members, my name is Jeff Shep, last name S-C-H-E-P-P. I'm the Adjutant Quartermaster of the Department of Montana. I, too, am opposed to this bill. This was done back, I was spoken with another member in the hallway. This was tried once and failed miserably in Minnesota. They refused to go to Bosnia. They lost all their equipment. And like my commander said, this was done. There's ways around it. They can and will take our equipment from us. We will lose members of our National Guard. We'll lose Title X positions. We'll lose federal technicians. We'll lose AGR positions if this is passed. So we need to take a close look at it. I understand Representative Deming's passion for the Constitution, but our members join, they volunteer. In the past, they were told. When they come to the Guard, they understand that we may be deployed to foreign countries to help with support missions or combat missions. To this day, I'm proud I spent 29 years in the Guard. The Guard saved my wife with this insurance that I have. I love every minute of it. These kids may lose their tuition assistance that they receive to go to college free. They may not come to the Guard because why would I want to? I have nothing to go to. I can remember going to drill and all we did was dig holes in a cornfield and guarded it all night long because we had no equipment. Do we want that to happen again? I stand opposed.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Charlie Mueller, CW5, retired from the Montana National Guard for the last 40 years. The things I'd like to talk about a little bit, and of course everybody has already at stuff, but my example is if you have 3 boys, the oldest boy ends up getting probably most of the stuff and it just trickles down to the youngest, right? In most cases. Kind of like the Guard, the Reserve, and the active Army. Who do you think's on the top of the scale? Not the National Guard. Now, we talk about the funding. You know, that's the big thing in the Montana Guard is all the assets we have. What about the forest fires, the federal forest fires? Something that, you know, that we support and whatever, and I've lost my, there we go. And the armories and all of this stuff. He can say what he wants about, oh, we won't lose any federal funding. Let me trust you. When you're supposed to have a 113 carrier and you get a Jeep and a quarter ton that's supposed to do the job for it, I don't think so. I don't think so. Also, like when you have a child that goes away, kind of like the Army goes away, and your child goes home or goes away to college, do you still support them then? Not all of us. That's what's going to happen. Thank you very much. And I do oppose this bill.
Mr. Chair, excuse me, Mr. Chair, can we get Mr. Mueller to spell his name for me, please?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's M-U-E-L-L-E-R. Oh, got it. I want to get the 100% attendance. It's Mueller, M-U-E-L-L-E-R.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Thank you.
Next opponent.
I do have handouts to.
Yeah.
My name is Lowell Long, L-O-N-G, and I am past commander of the American Legion Department of Montana. I served for 4 years in the United States Marine Corps and nearly 24 years in the Montana Army National Guard, including a year tour of Iraq. The American Legion Department of Montana rises in opposition of House Bill 404. If passed, this bill would be the end of the National Guard as we know it, in my opinion. The National Guard is federally funded, and if not able to fulfill its federal missions when called upon, what do you think the federal government's going to do? They're going to move the resources where it is going to be able to be used, especially in this light of the new fiscal things going on in Washington, D.C. right now. If Montana is not able to do the missions for the federal, on the federal side, the equipment's going to go away. Then we will not have it to deal with the fires and floods and other emergencies here in Montana. With the National Guard consisting of about 3,400 airmen and soldiers, this is 17 ten-thousandths of 1% of all of the forces. This bill will have no effect on the Army, Navy, Air Force on active duty or their reserves or the Malmstrom Air Force Base. It's only going against the National Guard. If the United States Constitution does not allow governors to refuse consent of the militia, and that the President is the Chief of Staff.
Mr. Long, your time is up.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Mary Hollow, spelled Hollow. I am the Executive Director of Prickly Pear Land Trust. We operate in a 4-county area: Broadwater, Lewis and Clark, Powell, and Jefferson counties. We work with Montana Army National Guard, and on behalf of the Guard and its objectives, we work with them to expand the ability for their training resources both on the ground and in the air. I'm concerned about the funding for this critical partnership for the Montana Army National Guard. They're core to our communities, our region, and our nation's security. And our partnership with the Guard supports their objectives directly. I encourage you to oppose this bill. Thank you.
Chairman, members of the committee. My name is John Christensen. Last name is spelled Christiansen. I'm a former National Guard colonel, retired in 2005. In remarks to the issues of equipment, the last assignment that I had was the Chief of Logistics for the National Guard, both Army on Air and the USPFO. And the USPFO and the Adjutant General are responsible for every single piece of equipment and every dollar that comes into the state and where it goes and how it's spent. And I can tell you right now that based on history of this organization, ask the Air Guard guys what happened when the United States Air Force decided to get rid of the M16s or the F-16s and send them somewhere else. And then followed on after that, the F-15 just kind of magically went somewhere else, in this case, New Jersey. And now we have the newest piece of equipment for these guys, the new C-130. Now, if they decide to make that thing go away, it'll go. Right now, the Army side has the latest equipment as far as M1s and Bradleys. And if you think for 1 second that they won't come in here and take that stuff, if they need it, it'll be gone. I understand fully that the senators that we have right now and representatives are all against this business of sending people off to war without a declaration of war from Congress. Understand that. That hasn't happened since World War II. Okay? There's a history behind that. It's probably going to happen again because the 2 authorizations for Iraq and Afghanistan were done away with. The global war on terrorism has not been done away with. And that means they can still deploy people. We have units that have been forward deployed in Poland. We have units that have gone on in the past on Reforger, going to Korea. And you're going to stop that from happening? This thing has got to stop, and it's got to stop this session and end it. We don't need to go through this again.
Time's up. Opposed. Next opponent.
Chair. My name is Tracy Ronick. Yes, I am the spouse of General Ronick. I'm on behalf of myself here. I am a vet. I served in the National Guard. My family, my father was a National Guardsman in Great Falls. I am also have 3 children serving. And they are your civilians in the public, a physician assistant, a pilot, and father. Anyways, I've worked all of this. I go back 40 years. I did enlistments and discharges, officer packages. And I guarantee you the people that signed up knew what they were signing up exactly like I did. I knew I was going to serve my state, and I knew I was going to serve my country nationally and federally. And why I chose the state of Montana and the National Guard was because I want to serve the state first, and I knew I could be activated nationally in a federal stance. But I chose that. We all have choices in our life to serve honorably in our state and our nation. And we choose that when we join the National Guard, because we choose our state and we choose federally from there on. Sir, thank you for the time, and I oppose this bill.
Thank you. Any more opponents in the room?
I do have a handout here. For the record, my name is Raymond Reed. I serve or have served on active duty and in the National Guard for the last 30 years. I retired in 2000. I currently host the Montana Military Museum at Fort Harrison and see the opportunities of the National Guard every day as I'm out there. I handed you a document that I pulled together. It's called Ramifications of Federal Funds if States Block Limited Call-Up under Title 10. And that's really the only thing that we block by not having is that title. That title also drives all of our funding. And as previous witnesses have provided, I do oppose this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more opponents? Any more opponents in the room?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Ross Fitzgerald, F-I-T-Z-G-E-R-A-L-D. I hail from Teton County, and I'm representing here myself. I, too, was a member of the Air National Guard here in Montana in 1969 when things were kind of boiling. As the previous testimony indicated, I signed up knowing in full well we could be shipped overseas. Not looking forward to it, but certainly willing to do my part. So I'm currently the finance officer up at Freeborn Post number 64 in Dutton. And I'm not speaking from my post, but more than likely they're going to have the same feelings I do. So in that vein, I want to be on the record as opposing this Benedict Arnold bill.
Any more opponents in the room or in the hall before we go online? Going once, going twice. Brianna, do we have some opponents online ready to testify?
We have 2 online.
Okay. Mr. Liebert, I think we're ready for you.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Perry and committee. Richard Liebert, L-I-E-B-E-R-T, Great Falls, Montana. Retired Army Lieutenant Colonel, served 40 years in regular Army, Army Reserve, and proudly in the National Guard and Montana National Guard for 7 years. I'm proud to have served with Colonel Christensen there and Colonel Reed, and also served with Representative Ed Byrne in the 163rd Infantry, where we got the best equipment, M2A2, Bradley fighting vehicles instead of bicycles and Jeeps. Because in the real world, the National Guard Bureau and DOD, they get guidance from, guess what, representatives of human nature in service committees at the Senate and House level, and they decide, and there are very influential Southern senators and congressmen who control those committees, because that's human nature on why we lose F-16s and F-15s and end up with C-130s, and otherwise we'll end up with paper airplanes. And I want to say one thing more. The sponsor was concerned about the welfare of our troops when they come back. Well, it's the welfare of our troops.
Mr.
We don't give them the
Liebert,
proper training.
Mr. Liebert, your 1 minute is gone. Sorry about that.
If they don't get the proper equipment, they're going to be in harm's way. That's why we train them well and we get funding. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Hagan, you're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, for the record, my name is Roger Hagan, last name spelled H-A-G-A-N, 38-year retiree of the Montana Air National Guard, retiring as the personnel officer for the state for the Air National Guard. Two quick examples, my personal examples of loss of equipment or gain of equipment. In 1981, I was on an early conversion team because another state that was supposed to get the F-15 had environmental issues, and the National Guard Bureau moved that conversion mission all the way to Montana 15 months early. And so it does happen, and it happens quick. Later on in my logistics career, I was on a workforce management team with the National Guard Bureau, and we had several of those entities as we were determining where manpower would be placed. Finally, I would say that I give you all, when I registered for online, the handout.
Mr. Hagan, your minute's up. Sorry about that. Next opponent.
No hands raised.
Okay. All right, we're done with the opponent's testimony. We will start the proponent's testimony with a reminder that the first proponent has 5 minutes. All the in-room opponents will have 2 minutes, and all the online proponents will have 1 minute.
Mr. Chair, do you want to give it a minute to switch out the room, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, do we need a minute to change the room a little bit?
Mr. Chair, can I approach with a handout? Yeah. Mr. Chair, are we ready?
Sir, we are ready.
All right. Well, Mr. Chairman, member of the committee, thank you so much for having the opportunity to come here today. My name is Dan McKnight. I'm a 13-year veteran of the global war on terror. McKnight, M-C-K-N-I-G-H-T. I'm a 13-year veteran of the military. I served in the global war on terror 2005 through 2007 as a member of the Idaho Army National Guard. Today I'm here as the chairman of a veterans organization called Bring Our Troops Home, and we strongly support the Defend the Guard bill. In the next few minutes, I want to address 4 critical points, and I'm happy to stand for any additional questions afterwards. First, this is a bipartisan supported bill. There's key leaders across the country, including the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, Health and Human Services Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., your own United States Senator, Tim Sheehy, Senator Rand Paul, that all support and have endorsed this bill. This bill was on the primary ballot in Texas this year in 2024, where it received 83% support. It outperformed even Donald Trump in Texas. This bill has been added to 7 state GOP party platforms across the country as an official plank. The Libertarian National Party has endorsed the bill as part of their party's plank, and we have numerous Democratic sponsors on state bills across the country. I want to get right into some of the important stuff here, the myth of defunding. Let me be clear. There are no credible threats, none whatsoever, that Montana will lose federal funding if this bill passes. Defend the Guard is not about ensuring, Defend the Guard is about ensuring that Montana's National Guard is only deployed for constitutional authorized purposes. It does not limit in any way at all, authorized missions under the Constitution or existing federal law. This bill is a safeguard, a brake check, if you will, to ensure that the state retains control over how the Guard is activated by the federal government. I want to get into a little bit about that since I have just a few minutes. The federal government cannot arbitrarily defund a state's National Guard. The Constitution firmly places control of all federal spending in the hands of Congress, not the president. This means that the executive branch and the National Guard Bureau lack the unilateral authority to withhold and reallocate funds that Congress has already appropriated. In the case of the National Guard, Congress determines how much funding each state gets and how much each unit receives. The DoD does not have the discretionary power to revoke the funds or for political or policy disagreements with the state. Some of the key statutes, it's important to talk about because there's been some misinformation that's been given. The key statutes that protect National Guard funding, they're not found in Title 10, they're actually found in Title 32. And it's important to note that 32 U.S.C. defines the framework of the National Guard as a component of the state and federal government. To defund the state National Guard would defund the federal National Guard. USC 104, 32 USC 104 establishes the federal state compact that guarantees funding for the state guard unless the state fails to meet mission, training, and readiness. Training and readiness. It doesn't say anything about unconstitutional deployments. Section 108 says that the president can withhold funds, but only if they don't meet that readiness and training standard. And then Section 109 clarifies that there's a dual role of the National Guard as both the state and federal entity, further protecting the funds, equipment, and manpower of the National Guard. Since Defend the Guard does not interfere with any federal mandated training, readiness, or organizational purposes, it does not meet the criteria under which the federal government could lawfully cut funding under 32 USC. So I want to put that to bed for just real quick, but I'm willing to stand for any further questions on that. I want to talk real quick about the federal stamp of approval that we always want to hear about. Before you have a quote from the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, and this has been talked about at length, and I've heard from several members of the committee that they would like to have from Pete a letter on his letterhead supporting this bill. Well, why do we bow down to the federal government, first of all? Absent of anything further than what he last said is the record. We are working with it. I was in West Palm with him in December with a private meeting talking about Defend the Guard, where he reiterated his support. Once he's done with his confirmation and his initial rollout, Pete and I will sit down again. We talk to his team daily. This is something he is very much in support of. I don't think that Montana should be turning over their rugged individual spirit. I'm from your neighbor next door. With the Sagebrush Rebellion, that proud rugged individualism, that's the states standing up to the federal government in an overreaching power. And finally, I want to talk about Title 10 real quick. It's important that we talk about this. Title 10 gives the president and Congress a very limited and defined reasons that they can activate the National Guard. The first one is in Section 12301A, for war or national emergencies declared by Congress. And when we talk about this, we have to understand that there's some legal canon. One of them says it's called expressio unis est exclusio alteris. It means what is already listed and not, what is listed, and what is not is presumed to be excluded, right? So it doesn't say anything here about going overseas without authorization. So Title 10 is very clear that for purposes of war is the only time the National Guard can be activated if it's been declared by Congress. I know my time is up. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you so much.
Chair, members of the committee, my name is Liam McCollum. That is Liammccollum. And today I'm testifying on my own behalf and for a few National Guardsmen that cannot be here today. And I have a handout. Can I pass those out really quick? So the reason that I support this is when I was 12 years old, my family got a call in the middle of the night with news that my dad's best friend, someone that we called uncle, was killed in Afghanistan. This was my first real encounter as a young person with the reality of death and the cost of war. When I put that in the context of the Afghanistan war, where we got bogged down for 20 years with mission creep every year, only to replace the Taliban with the Taliban, I sometimes wonder if the outcome of that war would have been different if Congress had simply reasserted its authority. I can't know how my dad's friend would have felt about this bill. He can't be here. but I hope it is obvious that the direct stakeholders of this bill cannot be present here today either. I just handed out the anonymous testimony of 3 Montana National Guardsmen who wish they could be here but can't out of fear of being reprimanded. There are many of them who didn't want to even risk anonymous testimony. As you will read, I really hope you read these. These men and women have observed deployments to unauthorized conflicts in many countries, including Syria, where their friends saw conflict with ISIS. From Montana, Tower 22 on the Syria-Jordan border was blown up just last year, and the majority of the casualties were guardsmen. You have an opportunity here today to represent those men and women who can't be here today, who can't testify, who can't lobby in the hallways. You have an opportunity to honor their sacrifice. Please consider the human cost. Thank you. I urge a vote for HB 404.
Thank you. Next proponent.
Mr. Chair, if I could, I have some. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Darren Gobb, and I'm losing my voice. Last name is spelled G-A-U-B as in boy. I'm a retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel, 28 years in primarily active duty service, 7 combat and hazardous tours, and even time in the Montana National Guard in Billings. I rise in support of this bill on behalf of myself, Montanans for Limited Government, the Montana Freedom Caucus, Restore Liberty, the Global Veterans Coalition, and all those National Guardsmen and women who cannot be here in uniform for fear of political reprisals from their chain of command. I have handed you in those folders a 2-page summary covering the major points of this bill. A 6-page document where I break down the opposition's arguments against this bill and destroy them individually, and please read that, it's worth your time. Department of Defense Directive 1344.10, which prohibits service members in uniform from taking part in politics and taking positions and stances on individual bills and legislation. That has been a tradition of the military for decades and should remain so. I unfortunately cannot provide you with 2 vans, cannot drive you to the airfield, cannot fly you in a helicopter, cannot use state taxpayer funds and resources and soldiers in uniform to lobby you against this bill. I can only tell you the truth, and that's all I want to do. There's also a 2023 letter in there of me resigning my position in the American Legion because they stood against the Constitution, which means I cannot stand with them. That's how important it is to me. Inside that folder is a testimony from a friend, Ruth Rader, who works with me locally on many issues. She asked that be included, as well as 94 signatures on a petition from across the state of Montana. And I'll be able to hand that to you shortly at the end, Mr. Chair, if you allow me to. How do I come at you with this information? I served from 1991 to 2019 in 7 combat and hazardous tours across the Middle East, Central Asia, East Asia, North Africa, Eastern Europe, Turkey, and Syria. I'm an aviator by specialty, but I'm a generalist in specialty as well, meaning I worked on a lot of different things globally. Foreign policy, DoD policy, force structure development and conflicts and budgets. Please ask questions, Mr. Chair and the committee. Thank you. Can I hand in this? Thank you.
Next proponent.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Kaiser Leib. That's K-A-I-S-E-R-L-E-I-B. As you know, I'm certainly not good at politics. The sort of calculus that you must undertake regarding funding is bothersome to me. But when it comes to ideological consistency, I think that there is only one suitable answer for you to reach as it respects this bill. The general is right. This should be handled at the federal level. The feds have shown us that they won't. That's the size of it. It falls to the state of Montana to do what we can to compel the federal legislature to do their job and actually declare wars before sending our people overseas. Thank you.
Greetings, Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Dashel Johnson, spelled Johnsson. I spent 5 years in the Marine Corps, first as an aircraft mechanic, then as embassy and consulate security in Pakistan, Sweden, and China. I met some of the most admirable, selfless, and passionate people across these different posts. These people forfeited years of their lives, proving a commitment most people won't. So why are we wasting their lives and commitment on wars that Congress will not declare. The dedication we demonstrate to our fellow Americans, often confused for a dedication to our government, should not be flaunted so easily. We are not signing up to die for some bureaucrat in Washington. We are signing up for our neighbors, our friends, or our families. We took nearly 60,000 casualties over the 20-year global war on terror, and for thousands more that didn't die in combat, they came home and killed themselves because of what they experienced. All of this and terror still won. So then what did they die for? Before we hastily rush into conflict, Congress must be the ones to put their names down and state that it is absolutely necessary. And if they are too cowardly to do so, then at least our men and women in Montana must be spared. National Guardsmen have a duty to Montanans. They are not pawns to be used by Washington. This bill is a monumental step in the right direction and the absolute least the state can do to protect its own citizens. If you get nothing else out of my testimony today, we are wasting the lives of our bravest young men on wars that the federal government does not even have the backbone to declare are wars. Voting yes on this bill will ensure our National Guardsmen can actually protect Montanans. I urge you to vote yes on House Bill 404.
Hello, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Thank you all for allowing me to testify. My name is Caleb Leger, C-A-L-E-B, last name spelled L-E-G-E. I'm a 27-year-old Army veteran. My family has served in the armed forces all the way back to the Revolutionary War, never skipping a generation. I'm a member of the American Legion. When I raised my hand and swore to defend the Constitution, I was prepared to uphold that oath with my life. And a lot of us have. The least a politician could do is uphold their oath and follow the Constitution. You will hold a private accountable for having a toaster in his barracks room, yet you will send us unconstitutionally overseas to undeclared wars. I have two good friends that came home, and they killed themselves after the things that happened. I have one of my best friends that is still alive, and he will never be the same. The fact this bill hasn't passed already is mind-boggling to me, in all honesty. It's a no-brainer in my eyes. It's constitutional. We know what we signed up for, okay? And we uphold our oaths. SecDef, the DNI, RFK, they all support this. Protect our Guard. Uphold your oaths. That is all.
Honorable Chair, members of the committee, my name is Drew Koester, K-O-E-S-T-E-R, and I live in Helena, Montana. I am representing myself. The book of Matthew says, "Blessed are the peacemakers," and I think we understand in our personal lives that peace is a virtue. It benefits us. However, when we enter the realm of national policy, we seem to think that these rules don't apply anymore. For decades, we've been told that by having an undeclared war, that by having preemptive, endless wars, that the American people are going to see benefits from this. So what are the benefits we've seen in my lifetime? I think that we are bigger targets than ever. There are 4 million people dead in the Middle East because of the war on terror. I'm going to guess they have relatives that don't like us very much. I think we are manufacturing terrorists with this foreign policy. We've bankrupted this country through overspending and inflation. We spent close to $900 billion on defense for 1 year, the last year. That's way too much. And we're destroying our soldiers. 17 veterans a day in the U.S. kill themselves. Divorce rates in the military are 90% higher than in the civilian world. And the #1 cause of death in active duty servicemen is suicide. They are 9 times more likely to commit suicide than to die in war. So what we are doing is not working. Montana should do its part to take some steps to stop this, because I don't think DC, with the amount of money they make on this, is going to do anything. The states need to say, we will send our Guard and they will serve if you send them the legal way. So we must use this power that we have to stop this abuse of central power. And I do want to say this, if you look at the ages—
Time is up.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have copies of my testimony I'd like to.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Leslie Soule, that's S-O-U-L-E. I am a concerned citizen of Montana, and I'm here addressing you in that capacity. When I was 18 years old, my stepfather broke down in tears and told me about how when he was 18, he watched his brother go off to fight in Vietnam. All those years later, he began to cry as he told me that story. And this tradition of unconstitutional, undeclared foreign wars began long before I came into this world. But I would love nothing more than to be able to say that that tradition ends with me. Don't you want that? None of you swore an oath to federal funding. You swore an oath to defend the Constitution. Speaking of the Constitution, my ancestor, George Soule, came here on the Mayflower and was one of the signers of the Mayflower Compact, our nation's very first version of a constitution. Thus, I'm here to claim my birthright, your birthright as Americans, that we hold our elected officials accountable to the terms of our Constitution. There's nothing in the world quite like our Constitution. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a bullet stopper. It is our most powerful weapon against tyranny. It is our most elegant petition for peace. Now, these generals that you've heard from today, they should be respected for their selfless acts of sacrifice in the defense of our nation. But I argue that we should not relinquish to them the authority to send our nation's young men and women off to fight and die on foreign soil. Thus, I urge do pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief for the committee's time, but my name is Representative Caleb Hinkle, representing House District 68, Hinkle, that's South Belgrade and Churchill. And I just want to say, as a former, I served 6 years in the Montana Army National Guard as an 11 Charlie indirect fire infantryman, drilling out of Belgrade for those 6 years. I'm a very strong supporter of this piece of legislation, as well as I just want to ask, what's more important? Are the oaths we all swore in January, or hypothetical what ifs that, if you look in those packets that Mr. Gobb has put out, very detailed arguments against and why they won't happen. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Perry and members of the committee. My name is Jasmine Krotkov. That's spelled Krotkov. I am a member of the Religious Society of Friends, also known as Quakers. Since the Second World War, we have opposed universal conscription based on the principle of individual conscience. No one is conscripted into the National Guard, but some of these Guard people have just mentioned that they joined because they want to provide humanitarian aid to their community and not in order to join combat deployments. War is about killing people. We shouldn't be subjecting our Guard troops to the moral injury that accompanies being involved in a killing in a way unless there is a compelling national interest, which Congress has the power to indicate by declaring war. Even our military members, who do specifically sign up to go to war, are being sent to fight in undeclared wars for reasons that are not clear to the public and are not clear to the soldiers. I'm concerned that sending our Guard members to combat abroad will enable and encourage our nation to continue to treat war as another tool or instrument of foreign policy. I'm grateful to the National Guard for all their very important work they do to support Montana. This is not an anti-Guard bill. I believe the best way to support our troops is to be sure that they can trust that the entire nation is behind them whenever they are sent to do their duty. Please support House Bill 404. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, committee, my name is Ray Southworth, Southworth. You know what? I come for the fathers and the mothers and their families that come back from war. The general says so many went over and they all come back. But guess what? They're not right. You know what PTSD is? It's anger. It's built up inside them. I know, my son had it. 2 tours in Iraq. Anger. Drink to oblivion. Taking drugs. And I call the VA. I'm afraid of suicide. What they say? He's 18. So when I joined 1972 at Butte, Montana, I swore an oath to defend the Constitution. Just because I'm out of the Army doesn't mean I don't defend that Constitution. It means a lot to me. I never seen a general in a foxhole with me. I never seen a general jump out of an airplane. I'm not saying anything bad about them. I'm just saying, when you put these young people, their brains are not ready to encompass killing. My son, in December, has traumatic things that happen. I don't know what he did over there. I see pictures of dead people, and they're sitting there with beer cans, the Army, and thinking that's a big deal. In Vietnam, they cut the ears off. And they welcomed us home, right, from Vietnam? You're going about your business, and we got people in a war. And it's 3 or 4 times the number of 58,000 in Vietnam.
Your time is up.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, committee.
Chairman Perry, members of the committee, my name is David Herbst, Herbst, and I'm representing Bring Our Troops Home. I do have a handout. Many of you, I have promised this handout to, and some of you even already received the handout, but just in case you lost it, I brought one for everybody. So if you go to the second floor of this state capitol, you will find a statue of an amazing, extraordinary woman, Jeanette Rankin. Underneath it says, I cannot vote for war. The committee knows her story, right? First woman in Congress. Voted no on World War I and World War II. Incredible story of courage and vision. One of the arguments that she made in her anti-war philosophy was that in 1917, women had no chance to vote for or against war. In taking her stand against World War I, she demanded representation for women in matters of war. The issues are different now, but they're also all too similar. Today, 90% of Congress have never voted on the AUMS that now scatter the National Guard troops worldwide. Entire generations have reached majority only to inherit wars they had no chance to debate the merits of. And not one of Montana's federal delegation was in Congress in 2001 when these conflicts began. Who is Dash going to hold responsible? They're all gone. The Defend the Guard Act returns the war powers accountability to democratic processes where they belong. Whole generations are here today to tell you we want representation for our generation in matters of war. Please listen to us. I ask you to honor Jeanette Rankin's legacy, honor the Constitution, and take a step that requires her courage to disrupt the status quo. Pass the Defend the Guard Act. Thank you very much for your time.
Are there any other proponents in the room? Proponents online?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we currently have 7 proponents online for this bill. We'll start with Christopher Engman.
Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Chris Enget, that's E-N-G-E-T, and I'm a veteran and Purple Heart recipient. I served my country and my state. I fought in a war Congress never declared, and when I came home, I fought a different war, one that nearly took my life. I struggled, I suffered, and I attempted suicide multiple times, and I'm not alone. I've lost more friends to suicide than to combat, and I've buried brothers and sisters who carried wounds no one could see, and I held family members that could never understand. We send our National Guard overseas without a vote, without debate, without accountability. We ask them to sacrifice everything for wars politicians won't even take responsibility for, and when they come home, if they come home, we fail them. I know because I lived it. Enough. If war is necessary, Congress must declare it. If they won't, we must keep our National Guard where they belong. Please pass Defend the Guard before more of us come home just to die waiting for help. Thank you.
Thank you. Next online. Ariel? No. Oh. Dick Pence?
House Energy and Federal Relations Committee. My name is Dick Pence. That's P-E-N-C-E. I'm from Billings. During the Vietnam War, I was an aircraft commander in the Strategic Air Force Air Command for 6 years. What I've heard in terms of the lack of respect for the Constitution this afternoon is stunning. Congress is limited to these powers. Congress alone has the power to declare war. Of all the wars since World War II, none of them meet the standard of being constitutional. If you look at the 4 major wars since 1945, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan, 90,000 dead Americans went in without declaring war. How many more Americans are going to die? How many Montanans are going to die before we put an end to this unconstitutional malevolence? Thank you.
Are there any other online? Any other proponents online?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I apologize. I'm having a little bit of a lag, so let me promote the next person, Robert Green.
Go ahead, Mr. Green.
Hello, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Robert Jacob Green. I love Montana. I love the people of Montana. Though I'm not a native Montanan, I chose to live in this state, and I care deeply about its future. During the 83 years that Congress has not declared war, we have still seen our brave men and women of the National Guard dying overseas or coming back home completely broken after fighting in conflicts that we ultimately lost. The last time we won a war was when Congress declared war. Think about that. This bill is about standing up to the federal government and doing the right thing for our own people. Since Congress won't live up to their oath to declare war before using our citizens, then you have to be the ones to defend the Guard. As you've heard today, when the National Guard took their oath to defend the Constitution, they meant it. In doing so, they also trusted that any member of the government that took an oath to support and defend the Constitution would actually stand by it. They have been failed. It is your duty to bring accountability to Congress by forcing them to live up to their oath.
Your time is up.
In harm's way.
Next proponent online. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, I am Sid Dowd, former chair of the Montana Libertarian Party and Kalispell City Councilman. I am testifying today as a private citizen and a Great Falls, Montana born and raised U.S. Army veteran. The views I express may not be the views of the city of Kalispell. A declaration of war from Congress is the constitutional and only way to include the American people in the decision to go to war. And I urge you to think and answer this question for yourself. Is the threat of losing funding going to prevent you from doing the right thing? I urge a do pass.
Next proponent online.
Next up, we have Tyler Frings, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Tyler Frings, F-R-I-N-G-S. I appreciate the moment given to speak as a proponent of HB 404. I am a proud son of a 25-year Army helicopter pilot. I've also worked for multiple veteran-owned small businesses. The greater military community is a group I've been immersed in since I was a child. With that said, HB 404 is simply requesting we follow the Constitution and allow National Guardsmen and women to fulfill their domestic duties and family duties here at home before knee-jerk reactions by D.C. bureaucrats and politicians. If funding for the National Guard is contingent simply upon the Constitution not being followed, perhaps that in itself is the greatest indictment of the military-industrial complex. Thank you.
Thank you. Next proponent online.
Mr. Chair, we do have someone online.
I need to have you state and spell your entire name, please.
Mr. Chairman, House members of the committee, I am retired Command Sergeant Major Julia Kelly, K-E-L-L-Y, from Pryor, Montana. I am speaking to you as a combat veteran who has experienced deployments with National Guard soldiers assigned to our active duty command. Throughout my career, ensuring troop readiness and welfare, I have repeatedly saw National Guard members deployed to combat areas under improper orders, often Title 32 or Title 10 orders without congressional authority. I support this bill because it closes the gap in our system by clearly defining combat deployment conditions, ensuring our service members operate under proper legal authority so they receive the support, recognition, and compensation they deserve. We must follow the law and safeguard the integrity of the Constitution. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and the representatives.
Next proponent online. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, committee members, for the record, I'm Glenn Fowler, F-O-W-L-E-R. I live in Gardner, Montana. I'm speaking in support of our founders' intent to have only the Congress declare war prior to sending our brave men and women into battle. In abrogating its constitutional responsibility, our federal government has made it too easy for our country to become engaged in divisive and often ill-advised wars. In 1962, Democratic President John F. Kennedy was reportedly ready to pull previously deployed military advisors out of Vietnam. President Kennedy was killed before he could bring our advisors home. We all know where things went from there. It's time we follow the laws we swear to uphold. It's time we assert our rights to have our wars legally declared and legally commenced. Therefore, Congress must honor their oath, taking a stand and declaring war, and this includes telling us why they are doing so. Therefore, failure of the Congress and federal government to take these steps should give Montana the right not to send our Guard into undeclared wars. I ask you vote do pass on House Bill 404. Thank you.
Next proponent online.
Mr. Chair, we have one last proponent online.
Go ahead.
Greetings, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Nicholas Ellerton, spelled E-L-L-E-R-T-O-N. I'm the Montana State Chair of Young Americans for Liberty, and I'm here as a concerned citizen of the state of Montana in support of House Bill 404, providing that our National Guard is utilized properly and responsibly. Our Guard members sign up to defend our country, not be sent overseas on frivolous and questionable police actions without a declaration of war by Congress. These young men and women leave their families, jobs, and communities to serve. If they're going to risk their lives, it should be for a just cause seriously debated and decided by Congress, not for endless manufactured conflicts without clear authorization. Passing this bill does not oppose the military, it protects those who serve and ensures that decisions about war and the lives of thousands of guardsmen are made thoughtfully and lawfully. The fact that our opponents worry more about funding than the cost of human lives is both disgusting and genuinely frightening. I urge you to vote yes on House Bill 404, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you. There are no further online.
Mr. Chair, there are no further proponents online.
Thank you. Informational witnesses in the room.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Todd Wayne. Last name is spelled W-A-Y-N-E. I've been a judge advocate with the Army for 15 years, and I'm here to answer any questions you might have about military authorities or potentially other legal issues that you have questions on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Janae Grotbo, J-A-N-A-E-G-R-O-T-B-O, and I am the Chief Financial Officer for the Department of Military Affairs. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other informational witnesses in the room? Informational witnesses online?
Mr. Chair, there are no informational witnesses online.
Questions from the committee? Representative Joy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for the informational witness, the judge advocate.
Chair Perry, Representative Joy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is kind of, you know the law, but I think when the term illegal war is used, is that a political term or a legal term? If you get my drift, thank you.
Chair Perry, Representative Joy. I'm limited to legal answers, so I will say that the Constitution was ratified in 1790. The first war fought with the authorization for the use of military force was in 1798. There's been dozens and dozens of military actions authorized since the nation's founding through an authorization for the use of military force.
Representative Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the first proponent, sorry, I didn't write your name down there. My apologies.
Dan McKnight, M-C-K-N-I-G-H-T.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the opponents obviously have claimed multiple times that this passage would be a threat to the National Guard's funding, and I was just pulled up the bill from last session, and I pulled up all the bills from all the other states that have brought this similar legislation, and no fiscal note was ever garnered. But then coincidentally, there's one garnered this year after this bill had some pretty strong traction last session, and all of a sudden there's a $132 million fiscal note. So I think it's clear that games are being played. And last I checked, the Defense Secretary supports this act, and I'm pretty sure she's using common sense. He would make sure that the Montana National Guard would never lose their funding. I guess, can you just explain from your aspect why you think that, from both a legal standpoint and practical standpoint, why passing this would not strip the National Guard of funding within this state?
Mr. Chair.
Voice is gone.
Representative, thanks for the question. That's actually a really great question. You're right. The fiscal notes in most states have come back with a zero on them, no cost to the state, because the Defend the Guard Act does one thing. It's a stop check that says before the state releases their troops into federal service, it will be done for a constitutional purpose. Once they go into federal service, the state has no more say. Once they get activated, the president can do whatever he wants, right? So this is a stop check that just simply says before they get released, they will meet one of the 5 criteria in Title 10. There's 5 criteria: war declared by Congress, annual training, periodic training, national emergencies declared by Congress, and national emergencies declared by the president under a limited capacity. So it has nothing to do with that. The funding that the National Guard gets comes in Title 32, and it says that they will be funded for the purposes of readiness, for training, and for pay and salaries for the National Guardsmen. It has nothing to do with when they go to Title 10. So when we keep seeing the proponent or the opponents say that if we don't go to war like the federal government wants us to, that's not declared, they're going to take away our funding. Well, you're conflating Title 10 with Title 32. They're 2 different bills, 2 different policies of federal law. One has nothing to do with the other. And so there's other parts of the federal government or federal law that says you can't defund the National Guard arbitrarily. Impoundment Act, which is 31 U.S.C. Sections 1511 through 1519. It prohibits the executive branch from withholding funds that Congress has already appropriated. We can go deep in the weeds, but I know time is short. But suffice to say, there are several codes that deal with the National Guard specifically and with the federal government's authority to bribe and coerce us with our own money. And so that we've not seen one credible threat from anybody that would put their name on the threat and say, I will take away your funds.
Mr. Chair, just one clarifying follow-up.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, and from any states that have passed this, has there been any federal funding stripped?
Mr. Chair, Representative, that's a great question. This bill has not been passed in any state. I want to be very clear about that. It has passed the Arizona Senate twice, and it's going for the third round tomorrow. It's passed the Arizona Senate. It's passed the Virginia House of Delegates 99-0. It's passed the New Hampshire House of Representatives. So it's a growing movement. It's now in 30 states moving through the legislatures as we speak right at this moment. So there hasn't been any loss of funding. There hasn't been any named threat with anybody's name on it. It's all been thinly veiled from the National Guard Bureau.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Sharp.
Mr. Chair, for the general, I'm going to make sure I get his, say your name correctly. Hornick? Am I saying that correctly? I don't want to get it wrong.
Mr. Chair, Representative Sharp, it's Ronick. The H is silent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't like to mispronounce people's names. Mr. Chair, General, I know you're in a bit of a difficult spot there. There's so much ambiguity about the post-World War II environment, and currently in modern times, we know that we've got troops in Djibouti. We've conducted combat operations in South Yemen. We've got troops all along the beltline of Africa looking for terrorists across the waistline of Africa there, and we've lost soldiers actually chasing around Joseph Kony in Africa. And then we also had, a lot of action in Syria where even troops there have fought against Wagner Group. So all of this, for example, with the bases that we have and troops there fighting in Syria, what is the authority, what is the legal authority that allows us to put people in that situation?
Mr. Chair, Representative Sharp, to get to the exact authority, I'm sure my legalist will give you the nuance, but really we swear an oath to two constitutions, and then based on the national level, Title 10 authorities, basically that have been delegated from Congress to the president to execute basically orders to deploy. It was called a gift map, and it's on your thing. It's a Global Force Management Allocation Plan. This is how they rotate forces into operations that have been approved by Congress and now executed by the President of the United States based on that. And there's about 10 named operations out there, and they are supported by active Guard and Reserve. Okay, roughly 10% of your National Guard is engaged through that process. Okay, so roughly 40,000 people through that process are activated to support and give rotations to the active reserves to those contingencies. And that changes based on the authorities given to us. So that's how they're activated to that. And then when we're in that generation cycle, based on our readiness, we are then we try to make sure our soldiers and airmen are trained, organized, and equipped, and they go do the mission. Okay, but we're in partner, trained to the same level, so when we deploy, there's no discrepancy based on the training status. We're all at the same level.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I'll have a couple follow-ups.
As long as you keep them on questions, okay?
Right.
Let's not tell a lot of stories, okay?
No,
Thank you.
I didn't tell a story. I was just asking him about the legal authority of that authorized when he mentioned, what the general mentions, at least 10 operations that are being conducted. So these are by congressional authority, but they're not a War Powers Act, correct?
Mr. Chair, no, there's been no declaration of war for these operations. They've been authorized by Congress and the President to execute these named operations.
Follow-up question?
Okay.
General, is it true that we are at war with Al-Qaeda and its affiliates?
Mr. Chair, Representative Sharp, we are in combat operations based on how we're basically ordered to those regions, and it could be active guard or reserve doing those things. So it's basically how it's labeled as a named operation, and it could be or may not be in a combat declared zone where they get increased entitlements for combat pay and those type of things. So.
Okay, Mr. Chair, follow up. Information is somewhat dated, but I do believe that we have an official policy stating that we are at war with Al-Qaeda and its affiliates. That's maybe a bit dated information. Are you aware that Senator Sheehy is in favor of this?
Mr. Chair, Representative Sharp, that's misinformation. I have talked directly to all 4 of our congressionals, Senator Daines, Senator Sheehy, Representative Zinke, and Representative Downing, all have discussed this with them, and all are not in support of this type of bill at a state level. They're very much in support of that conversation at the national level, what the authorities are, and that needs to be looked at. But I have talked to them personally. They would very much want to have a conversation with you. You want to call them directly, but that is not a true statement. Both of them understand the situation that we currently have and how the authorities are going. That conversation needs to be either at the authorities level with Congress or at the Supreme Court level to define, are we actually following the Constitution? But until then, we follow the lawful orders that are given us, whether we're in a Title 10 status under the President or a Title 32 status under the Governor.
And my last question, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Absolutely your last question.
Mr. Chair, in general, I think, do you understand the ambiguity that is bothering many of the people that are proponents of this bill with regard to committing young people into combat more with the congressional approval versus a unified statement or a declaration that the nation is in fact at war?
Mr. Chair, of course all of our service members are concerned. There's no one that wants peace more than a service member, okay? We want to have that deterrence, that peace through strength, okay? That no one wants to mess with us. But if we are called through the authorities, we have to basically deploy, and we don't like that. I say we don't like that. We honorably serve, and we put our lives on the lines. And I know it was made a comment of, no one wants to be in a different class, and that's probably my biggest point is, if you're going to deploy, you're going to restrict the National Guard, okay, that is very detrimental because now other ones have to pick up the load based on those rotations and stuff like that. And if you look at the war on terror that we just had, 46 of your Montanans died in that war, okay? They're active and reserve. Only 2 were in the National Guard, okay? I'm sorry we lost 1 life, but this bill would not have protected those 46.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman, point of order really quick. I just want to state for the record.
Representative Mitchell.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to state for the record that our Senator Sheehy multiple times has came out publicly supporting Defend the Guard.
Are there any other questions? Representative Griffith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. Let's start with, and I don't mean start in a bad way, with Mr. McKnight.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. McKnight, you know, in constitutional law, we have a fun time debating this, and it's definitely not the first time nor the last time I'm going to hear about the war authority, the fact that we send our troops out elsewhere without a congressional authority or constitutional authority. That's something we talk about all the time in law school, and you're bringing me back to law school here. So I heard that we have 10 active deployments that Congress authorized. Do you know what law or constitutional authority Congress has authorized these 10 active deployments?
The last authorization that Congress, Mr. Chair, Representative, thank you for the question. The last time Congress authorized, in using that term loosely, was 2002 with an authorization of use of military force to go to Iraq. Prior to that, it was 2001 with an authorization of use of military force to go to Afghanistan to hunt down the people that attacked us on 9/11 and those that aided and abetted them, and to kill Osama bin Laden. We did everything in that AUMF by February of 2002 except for the Thank you, bin Laden. I had a glitch. Got to reset the matrix. We did that in February of 2011. And so those authorizations of use of military force should have been put to bed. But instead, President Obama went to Congress in 2013 and said, I'd like to go to war in Syria. And Congress said no. Guess what he did? He went anyway. No authorization, none. And we stayed there and we fought a war that started with 3% of the boots on the ground were from the National Guard. And when the war ended, which it's not even done yet, but the al-Assad regime fell in December, 58% of the boots on the ground were from the National Guard, right? The active duty military didn't have an authorization, so they backfilled with the National Guard. And what happened in that war is the National Guard was on one side with DOD funds, shooting bullets at the other side that had money from USAID and the CIA. That's because Congress did not authorize the war. So the short answer is no authorization.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask the same question of Mr. Talia, if he's in here. I thought I saw him.
Hiding in the back, Mr. Chair, Representative Griffith, could you say the question one more time, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Mr. Talia, the same question for you, and that is in law school, and we had this back in law school. I heard that we have 10 active deployments out right now, and Congress had authorized them. Do you know under which law or constitutional authority Congress has the ability to send our troops into active deployments?
Mr. Chair, Representative Griffith, yes, and I will say that this is more complicated, this issue is more complicated than the fact that the Constitution says Congress has the power to declare war. There are military operations other than war.
Pull your microphone to you, please.
I'll eat it. There are military operations other than war that need to be conducted. So what you see at the federal level, Congress exercises its check, and I spent many years as a military fiscal lawyer. Fiscal law in the military is extremely important. We use the term money as a weapon system in the context of the military because you are using money to do different things. Like Mr. McKnight just said, there's different types of resources, financial resources that are provided in addition to combat operations. So Congress has what's called the power of the purse. You hear about it. And no money may be lent by the Treasury unless Congress authorizes it. I'm butchering it, but essentially if Congress doesn't say you can spend $1, you can't spend $1 in the executive branch. And so that has largely been the check that Congress has, but you need two things to do anything in the military. You have to have them both line up perfectly. You have to have an appropriation, which is your money, and you have to have an authorization. Oftentimes those authorizations come in the Defense Authorization Act. So for example, I mentioned in my testimony that I spent some time in Syria. When you look at what happens in Syria, there are certain special sections that are little carve-outs for military operations, and they're buried in an NDAA, which is like 800 pages long. And if you practice law in this area, you know exactly where they are. And the Buck-McKeon Act is still somewhere buried in my brain, even though I haven't looked at it in 5 years since I was doing this. That's where you find the authorization. And that's Congress's authorization. That's Congress telling the executive branch, in particular Secretary of Defense, here's what you can do. And you have to line that up with the appropriation. And occasionally, they don't line up because budgets go at different times. And so there are some different schools of thought about whether or not there is an implied authorization in an appropriation. Maybe not. I'm going to take you all the way down this rabbit hole if you want me to, but I think everybody also wants to go home.
I don't think you're going down that rabbit hole.
Thank you for saving me, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, follow up.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one last question. All right, so we're being asked to stick our neck out and make this decision, and I think I've let everyone know I'm on the fence here. Why has a lawsuit been filed to challenge the federal government on their ability to do these deployments? Because I can't find one in Lexis. Does anyone know if there's been, and Mr. Telly, I'll ask you, if there's been a lawsuit filed, how far it's gone and where we're at with it. I do see some nods behind him, too.
I can re-refer to Lieutenant Colonel Wayne if you would like an answer on that specific question.
So your answer is you don't know?
Not a clue, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, Representative, there has been attempts to challenge authorizations for the use of military force post 9/11. Most of those lawsuits have been unsuccessful due to the persons having lack of standing to challenge those suits because of there's no generalized taxpayer standing. I would note that in 1800, the U.S. Supreme Court did adjudicate undeclared wars authorizations for the use of military force. And in that case, the Supreme Court said that you have perfect war and imperfect war, and that Congress is allowed to authorize military action without a formal declaration of war. That case is Bass v. Tingey from 1900.
May I ask one follow-up just to give Mr. McKnight the ability to answer that as well, or someone from the other side? Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. Mr. McKnight?
Yes. Again, it's a great question. I'll stay out of the rabbit hole, Mr. Chair, I promise.
Okay.
There has been several lawsuits that have challenged the president's authority to take us to war. That is true. All of them have been dismissed for standing, but there's been several more where they've tried to sue to stop the president from taking the National Guard and sending them overseas without a declaration. Those all have been dismissed because once a troop has been activated under federal Title X, the states have no more standing, which is the purpose of the Defend the Guard bill, is to stop that and make sure that the check is that there's 5 reasons you can be activated on the National Guard to go overseas. And if they're violating those, and it started with President Bush and Cheney in 2002, they would backfill the active duty military. And then once they were federalized, they got the eyes on the prize and they said, we've got all these new bodies, let's start another war, right? So that's what once they're in Title X, we have no more authority on them. The state's only interposition, the only one, is to stop it before it gets to Title X. And that's what Defend the Guard does. It doesn't stop anything else. All right, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Representative Zolnikoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the sponsor.
You've forgotten me for a second, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, Representative Deming, well, first, I guess I just want to thank everyone for being here. I know this is a long hearing. I was listening downstairs before I arrived in the room, but it's clear to me that you're very passionate about this issue. So I was wondering, could you touch on maybe just walk the committee through what you believe the intention of the Founding Fathers was in the Constitution that you passed out in Article 1, Section 8 on the legislative branch versus the executive branch having that power to declare war?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the Constitution was actually ratified in 1788. We heard differently. What the founders were intending was to keep the war power in the hands of the Congress. And that's why some of the questions that we've heard here, the answers don't make sense because it's not that complicated. If you read that document that I handed out to you, that Constitution, you will see pretty clearly that there is really clarity in that document. And so they intended, not for the president, but for the Congress to declare war. And they were allergic to any other kind of military activity. And so when you look at the Constitution in whole, and in my opening, when I talked to you guys about where those things are found in the Constitution, I probably should send that to you guys in an email so you can walk through yourself. But it's easy. The executive prosecutes the war only when the Congress gives them the authority to do that, and no other time. And remember, the founders had been under the authority of a king who put troops on the ground. And they didn't like that at all. So they saw that the king could send troops over to the Americas and beat up on the Americans. And they said, we don't want that kind of system. So historically, that's something that the the founders absolutely insisted on, and I think we should follow their lead.
Thank you.
Representative Brewster.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the general, please.
Mr. Chair, Representative Brewster.
General, I suspect you're a history buff, as most senior officers are. Why do you think that we moved away from declaring war constitutionally and went to a different way?
Mr. Chair, Representative Brewster, I'm just an airman, a soldier, and I basically do the lawful orders that are given me under the Constitution and how it's interpreted and executed to me. How do they do that? Since World War II, is the last time we had a declared war. I feel that they feel there's probably, if there is a war to be declared, it gives the president expansive powers, okay, to execute the war once declared. So I think, from my perspective, they now allow more authorities at a lower level to contain the war and the appropriations to it. That is probably my best assessment that I see why it's changed, but whether we're declared the war or into another one, into that until somebody says it's illegal and doesn't, and that's why I operate, I don't get the option of saying that once we're mobilized or in the state or the national level, I follow lawful orders of the president, if activated Title 10, or the governor to state active duty to protect. It could be for fires, floods, drugs, whatever they want to do. That is my perspective, Mr. Chair, Representative Brewster.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, could I redirect?
Sure.
To, I'm sorry, I forgot your name as well. Just, Mr. Chair, maybe you have studied that history.
Sure. Mr. Chair, Representative Brewster. Yes, my belief is that they stopped doing it because it's hard, right? They don't want to go home and have to explain to their constituents why we're in an unpopular war. War was very unpopular after World War II. We just spent the war to end all wars in World War I, and then we moved right into World War II just a decade later. And so Congress has abdicated that responsibility. And shortly after World War II, we found ourselves in a potential conflict in Korea. And instead of having to go home and explain to the moms and dads in Helena why their sons were going back to war again, they punted. And we went to Korea with the UN declaration, not a United States declaration. Under the authority of the United Nations, we took our country into war again. So I think it's because it's hard. I have a lever of power with my state representative, my congressman a little bit, but my real lever of power is with my state representative and my state senators. I see them at church. I go to school with them. As a citizen, I can influence policy at the state level, but I can't in Washington, D.C., and they know it.
Mr. Chair.
Representative Brewster.
Just follow up, please. I was actually looking for more specific about the history of it. And if you had, in your studies, if you had learned, you know, I mean.
Representative, can you speak into the microphone, please?
Yeah, sure. Sorry. Thank you. A bad habit. Yeah. But I was just more interested in the history, and if anybody had looked around and said, why did that change? Why did we abandon that phrase, I guess, in the Constitution and go a different way?
Sure, Mr. Chair.
Seems odd to me.
Mr. Chair, Representative, I'm gonna do the most prudent thing I can at this point. I also don't know, so I appreciate the your example. I don't have a great answer to that.
All right.
Thank you.
Representative Millett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for Major General Hronik.
Mr. Chair, Representative Millett.
Mr. Chair, Major General, you've heard the testimony that the new Defense Secretary supports this type of legislation. If he does support this type of legislation, doesn't that kind of undercut some of the argument that the Pentagon would penalize Montana if we did pass HB 404?
Mr. Chair, Representative Millett, The quotes that they're using, it came from when he was a newscaster that I have seen. I have worked with the National Guard Bill, with the commanders there, and they are engaged with clarification on his stance. Right now, his clarification is, I'm all about a military that has a warrior ethos, is a war fighter, and is a lethal military. He has not said whether this is in the National Guard or not. So we're waiting for an opinion right now, but to use that as a stance as him in a previous job, just like any of you in a previous job, probably have a different perspective when you're in the new job. So we're waiting for any kind of guidance from that perspective. So right now we're engaged, and Secretary Hessett was a guardsman, but he has not come out and said that anything different than what we're currently to the orders that we're doing right now.
One follow-up.
Sure.
Mr. Chair, Major General, you said that you're engaged. What exactly does that mean? Have you actually contacted the Secretary of Defense or the Pentagon and asked them specifically what would happen if HB 404 passes here in Montana? Because we're talking about $132 million.
Mr. Chair, yes, I have talked directly to the Chief of the National Guard Bureau, the directors of both the Army and Air Force and the National Guard, and asked for clarification. As we, as adjutant generals, there's 54 of us that are in the same situation, or similar. There's not a lot of states. There's probably about, I think, 30s that are having a defend the guard type bill, and we're asking for clarification. And so I've had those direct conversations. But right now, in the programming and budgeting world, they'll continue to go down to resource your National Guard with forces that can be assessed for the Title X missions. And we've been not told to do anything differently.
No more questions.
Representative Sharp.
Mr. Chair, for Darren Gaub.
Mr. Chair, Representative.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Gaub, I know a little bit of your background, and I wondered if you would want to take a chop at the question that Representative Brewster asked about what's changed in the post-World War II environment with regard to a declaration of war.
Mr. Chair, Representative, as a historian, I guess I'll lean back on the concept first that that's a hard question to answer, because you're questioning people's motives about why they do things, in which there may not be a historical record capturing all of that. But Korea happened because we wanted it to. And we used the UN as the excuse to do it, despite what the American people may think. There was no debate in Congress to decide whether or not we should go, and what the risk was, and who was accepting that risk. We just went. Vietnam was very similar in that regard. These are just wars that we decided to go to, and the American people were left out of the equation through Congress. The global war on terrorism, as it were, which right now is probably one of the biggest challenges, is because we're actually fighting an idea or an action called terrorism, rather than declaring war on an entity or a nation, other than Al-Qaeda itself. So when you talk about that, now you're trying to limit a war that, frankly, where is there not terrorism? It almost gives you an excuse to go to war in any country in the world anytime you want to, and we frankly have for 24 years. No check, no balance. All of those people, again, who voted on that are gone. I think we can both say that many of us who are veterans and here served during the global war on terror, or even for portions of it, can say that we just kept going and we didn't know when to stop because our executive told us to. We didn't fully grasp the idea that the military was a military at war, not a nation at war. And we're now acting more like the Roman army, where the emperor sends his military wherever he wants them to as a personal tool, rather than a representation of risk and willpower of a nation through Congress and the people.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, just want to make a point for the record with your indulgence. The Secretary of Defense has came out on the news claiming he supports Defend the Guard, and I personally, the day before the inauguration in Washington, D.C., asked at the Capital One Arena our next Secretary of Defense in a suite. I asked him, do you support the Defend the Guard movement, and he clarified that yes, he does. So just want to clarify the record, or clean up the record.
Are there any further questions? Representative Carter.
Mr. Chair, I waited till last to make sure all my questions were asked, except two. Mr. Chair, how about for Lieutenant Colonel Hatch? Wayne, I'm sorry. Wayne. Lieutenant Colonel Wayne, I was going to ask about the Hatch Act. We had a field trip this week, and I see it was mentioned that this was in violation of the Hatch Act. Do you want to clarify that for me?
Chair, Representative Carter, I can go over that law for you real fast. So there's two areas of law that cover potential activities of uniformed service members. So the first one is the Hatch Act. That involves partisan politics. So Republican, Democrat, promoting a candidate for office. Members of the military are prohibited from engaging in partisan politics. The second area of law is lobbying, and that is either promoting the advancement of legislation or opposing legislation. In this particular instance, the Adjutant General is a state employee. He is not subject to the federal anti-lobbying statute. He's also not subject to any DoD regulations related to lobbying. Specifically, National Guard regulation permits the Adjutant General to do what he's doing here related to HB 404.
Thank you. And then a question for Lieutenant Colonel Ronick, Mr. Chair.
Major General.
Major General. Thank you. Sorry.
Mr. Chair, Representative Carter.
Are military members these days under conscription, or do they volunteer to join the military?
Mr. Chair, Representative Chair, it's a total volunteer force, and we enlist voluntarily and swear oath to both to the United States Constitution and the Montana Constitution voluntarily, and they then once they enlist, or there could be on the enlisted side a term of that enlistment.
Follow up, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
So some of the complaints we heard sounds like, people have mentioned PTSD and so on. It sounds like an issue that the VA needs to deal with. Do you want to touch on VA funding and how that works in the state, Mr. Chair?
It's actually not part of this bill.
Very good, Mr. Chair. Understood. And then, let's see, my last question would probably fall under the same category. So no more questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Oh, sorry. Vice Chair Kometz.
Mr. Chair, I would just like to go on the record that Representative Deming and I did ask candidate Sheehy in a public forum with over 150 people in attendance, explaining the Defend the Guard bill in absolute great minute detail. And in front of that audience and in front of Representative Deming and myself, he pledged his support to defend the Guard as a candidate. And I just wanted to go on record and make that statement.
Are there any further questions? Being none, does the sponsor want to close?
You didn't wait very long.
No, I didn't.
That's a good tactic. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I appreciate this robust hearing. I am going to apologize in advance. There's a lot of stuff here, and I've been taking notes copiously, so some of these may be a little disjointed, but I'm going to cover some of the complaints that we had, and I think it's been beaten to death, but I'm going to say it one more time. I would be curious to hear whether or not the Secretary of Defense would actually agree with the interpretation of that Department of Defense Directive 1344.10 that we've heard here tonight. I also want to make sure that everybody understands that Vice Chair Kometz and I were in the room, and it wasn't just, I think it's a great idea. No, it was 100% behind that. So either he has changed his mind 180 degrees, or there's some obfuscation going on here. I just got to tell you, it's disappointing. Maybe he'll come out and say, no, I never meant that, but we'll see. All right, so, and some more, again, it's going to be disjointed. I apologize in advance, especially for the late time. So my dad was in the fleet off of Guadalcanal, 1942. My son was a force recon Marine out of Billings until he hurt his back and had to jump out of that. I'm not a isolationist whatsoever. I think that we should, there are times when we have to fight. I don't think there's any question about it. And we have to be ready to fight. And so that's not what this bill is about. This bill is about something entirely different than that. Again, this is going to be disjointed. I can't help it. I apologize. 1942 was the last time that America declared war. And I want to make sure that you people understand the circumstances. You see, it wasn't 1941. It wasn't December 8th, 1941. It was 1942. And here's what was going on. FDR was certain we'd have to go to war in Eastern Europe. But he didn't think it was proper without a declaration. I wasn't alive then, but I miss those days. The president could have gone to Congress and gotten anything. He could have sent troops in Eastern Europe without a declaration of war. But in the midst of the biggest war in world history, he insisted on getting the Congress's okay. Why can't we do that today? You know, we talked about forest fires and all kinds of other stuff. You know, the Guard can't manage that when they're in the Middle East someplace. We need them here. And there are going to be times, I think soon, we're going to need a lot of them here. I think the American people are sick and tired of these forever wars. I mean, I am. And so I know, we heard testimony that this Defend the Guard is being heard in at least 30 states. It's going to pass. It's going to pass. It's going to pass in some states. I want it to pass here first. I had an opponent in the last session tell me, well, I understand, and by the way, he was an opponent online this time. He says, I can understand where you're going, but Montana can't be first. Just imagine the men who left the landing craft on D-Day saying, yeah, just soon, we can't be first. I want Montana to lead. All right, let's keep going. The Constitution really doesn't care about your helicopters. We all swore an oath to support the Constitution. We did not swear an oath to lay down for federal money or helicopters. I want everybody to remember, and by the way, that Constitution is a gift that I think you could probably use over and over again. What part of the Constitution, I laid it out pretty clearly that this section and that section, Congress declares war, President prosecutes it. What part of the Constitution are we going to ignore next? A man I know who deals with suicidal veterans, that's what his job is. He does that 24/7. You call him, he'll answer the phone. He told me a story the other day. He told me a veteran was having trouble, told him he was trying to save this guy. He said, I'm going to die under this bridge. That veteran told him that. That's what we're facing. We're not talking about helicopters, Bradleys. We're talking about men's lives. We heard that, some of these people volunteered. Oh, yeah, we haven't had a draft for quite a while. So does that mean we can abuse them? Is that really what we mean? That we can send them into war in unconstitutional, and I'll say it, it's illegal, in illegal wars, because they volunteered? Earlier we heard this bill declared the Benedict Arnold bill. who's the one that's insisting that we follow the Constitution? It's not the opponents. It's this bill and me and these good people. We heard testimony that, yeah, they can move this stuff around. Well, yeah, they can move this stuff around if they had to. F-16s, F-15s, we lost those, right? Had the Defend the Guard bill been passed then? No. So, yeah, they're going to move that stuff around. Are they going to move it around in punishment for a policy decision that a state makes? I just don't see it. You know, veterans started this Defend the Guard movement. I think we should listen to these guys. You heard them. So today, you saw some kids in the gallery. Remember those kids up there with the gray on? Right? You know, we talked about numbers, and we've lost some National Guard forces in the global war on terror. They probably weren't very much older than those kids up there. So I want you to think about that when you picture these people that are National Guardsmen that I'm trying to defend. And when one of our National Guard soldiers doesn't come back from an unconstitutional and illegal deployment, I hope you don't tell their families you did it for money. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
That concludes the hearing on House Bill 404.